What's the worst thing someone ever said while breaking off an engagement? I never thought I'd be that person who stands in a silent corridor, heart pounding like it's about to burst, dressed in a white gown that was supposed to be the gateway to the happiest day of my life, only to realize everything is unraveling. But there I was, in this impossibly quiet hallway of the country club we'd rented for the ceremony, surrounded by half-inflated balloons and bouquets that no longer mattered. My name is Rachel, and I was supposed to be marrying the man I thought was my soulmate. I could hear my mother sobbing softly in the adjoining room, my father cursing under his breath, and my bridesmaids frantically trying to piece together some semblance of sanity. Yet none of that noise really registered. In my head, all I heard was Adam's voice echoing the single most devastating sentence I'd ever heard. You were never good enough, and I was just too weak to admit it. If I close my eyes, I can still see the look on his face. He was standing in his tuxedo, hair neatly combed, looking every bit the handsome fiancé who should have been waiting to take my hand at the altar. Except his expression was twisted with a mixture of fury and disdain, and his words were drenched in raw contempt. It was like seeing a stranger wearing the face of the man I loved. I remember dropping my bouquet, lilies and pink roses that we'd spent hours choosing together, and watching the flowers splatter across the polished. Then everything became muffled, like I was underwater. My heart felt as if it had plummeted into the pit of my stomach. The rest is a blur of tears, choking sobs, and the growing realization that my entire future had just been nuked in the most humiliating public way possible. I guess I should back up a bit, because the meltdown didn't just happen out of nowhere. Or maybe it did, at least from my perspective. But in hindsight, there were all these signs that should have warned me. A year ago, I believed Adam was the greatest blessing that had ever walked into my life. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party. My friend Hannah insisted I stop by after work because this guy is totally your type. I'd never been into blind dates or casual meetups, but something about Adam pulled me in right from the start. He was tall, had sandy brown hair, bright blue eyes, and a confident but not cocky demeanor. He seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say, from my love of classical piano to the mundane stories about my job in marketing. He laughed at my jokes, told me he found my laugh infectiously adorable, and by the end of that night, I was pretty much floating on a cloud of dopamine. In the weeks that followed, it felt like we were living in a montage of every perfect rom-com. Late-night drives to get ice cream, spontaneous road trips to the nearest beach, stolen kisses in grocery store aisles. My friends teased me that I looked like I had cartoon hearts dancing in my eyes every time I mentioned his name. And it wasn't just me. Adam seemed equally smitten. He'd send me good morning texts, check up on me during stressful work days, plan sweet weekend getaways. I remember one random Wednesday evening when he told me to dress up, then took me out to an upscale restaurant without any special occasion. The only reason he gave was, "You deserve to feel special." I soon found out he was a freelance photographer who'd been trying to break into commercial. He had an artist's soul, and he'd share these heartfelt stories about traveling around the country, taking photos of city skylines at dawn or capturing quiet moments in nature. He could be playful and adventurous one minute, then somber and introspective the next, but it never struck me as strange, just layered, deep. I saw it as part of his charm. His family background was a bit more complicated. Adam rarely talked about his parents, but I gathered they had a rocky marriage that ended in an acrimonious divorce. He'd drop remarks like, "I never learned how to trust love," or "No one in my family stays married for long, so it's probably in my DNA to screw things up." I tried to reassure him that he wasn't destined to repeat his parents' mistakes, and I thought he believed we had each other after all, and that felt strong enough to defy any so-called curse. Within 6 months, we were practically living together. Most of my stuff migrated to his apartment, which was this charming loft with huge windows that let in tons of natural light. I turned one corner of his living room into a little workspace for my marketing projects, while he turned another corner into a mini photography studio. We'd pass each other in that open space, exchanging quick kisses or silly faces while working. It felt natural, like we were already building a life together. So when he proposed, I wasn't exactly shocked, but I was absolutely over the moon. He did it in the most romantic way. We were in Chicago for the weekend, and at sunrise, he took me to a rooftop vantage point to look at the city. I was admiring the pink-orange hues spread across the skyline when I turned around to see him on one knee, a ring in his hand, tears in his eyes. "Rachel," he said, voice trembling, "you make me feel like I finally have a home in this world. Will you marry me?" I didn't even let him finish. I blurted "yes" before he could continue, and we laughed, then cried together. It was one of those moments that felt like it was straight out of a cheesy rom-com, but it was ours, and it was perfect. We called everyone, my parents in Maine, his sister in Florida, our best friends scattered across the country. Everyone sounded genuinely thrilled. Even Adam's dad, who rarely showed enthusiasm about anything, told him he was proud. My mom, Linda, shrieked loud enough that I had to hold the phone a foot from my ear. "I've been waiting for this day," she cried, immediately launching into a million questions about the date, the venue, the flowers. My head spun with joyful excitement. But with the engagement came a level of pressure I'd never experienced. My parents offered to help pay for the wedding, but they had ideas. Lots of. My mom wanted a huge church ceremony in my hometown, while Adam and I were thinking a simpler outdoor wedding near the water. His father, John, insisted on inviting business associates and old friends from Adam's childhood, adding at least 40 more people to the guest list than we wanted. We ended up compromising. A moderately sized wedding at a picturesque country club near the coast, with about 150 guests. The date was set for late September, giving us about 8 months to plan. As we dove into the details, floral arrangements, seating charts, tasting sessions for the menu, Adam started getting edgy. He'd get frustrated over small things, like if the caterer was 10 minutes late or if my mother changed her mind on the color scheme. At first, I chalked it up to normal wedding stress. Everyone says planning a wedding is intense, right? But the changes in his mood were stark. He'd snap at me over trivial misunderstandings. One day, I remember him saying, "Why can't you just handle it yourself? I have a ton of stuff going on with my photography gigs," in a sharp, almost accusatory tone. I tried to be patient. After all, he was juggling a new contract with a local magazine, plus we were finalizing details for a wedding that was increasingly feeling like a three-ring circus. I figured if we just got through the planning stage, everything would smooth out. But the tension escalated as the months wore on. Once, I found him in our living room at 2 a.m., pacing back and forth, muttering about how we were wasting too much money and that marriage might ruin what we had. I hugged him and told him, "It's normal to have cold feet sometimes. We can keep things simpler if that helps." He'd soften for a moment, bury his face in my neck, and then whisper how he was just nervous because he wanted everything to be perfect. I believed him. I wanted to believe him more than anything. Then there were the rumors. My friend Hannah, the same one who'd introduced us, confessed one night, I heard Adam was seen having drinks with some girl from his photography circle. They looked cozy." She claimed it might be innocent, but her tone suggested otherwise. I confronted Adam about it. He got defensive at first, accusing me of spying on him. Eventually, he admitted he'd gotten a drink with a colleague, but insisted there was nothing romantic about it. "Can't I have female friends without you losing your mind?" he snapped. I was taken aback. I'd never been the jealous type. In fact, I'd encouraged him to network, but something about his reaction made me uneasy. Still, I let it go because the wedding was 2 months away, and the last thing I wanted was a major blowout fight. His outbursts continued in smaller ways. He'd roll his eyes if I asked him to help pick out invitations. He'd complain about traditional nonsense like writing personalized vows. I felt like I was dragging him through the process rather than planning with him. One evening I got teary-eyed because we were picking our first dance song and he just kept shrugging at every suggestion. I asked, "Adam, do you even want this wedding?" He paused, set his phone down, and for a moment I thought he'd finally open up. But he just rubbed his temples and said, "I'm tired, Rachel. I can't do this conversation right now." Then he walked away. I spent half the night crying, and the other half telling myself it was just pre-wedding jitters. Perhaps I was naive or too hopeful, or maybe a combination of both. All I knew was that I loved him, and I believed that once we stood at that altar, we'd exchange vows and remember why we fell for each other in the first place. As the big day approached, my parents flew in, Adam's relatives started arriving, and everything went from stressful to outright chaos. My mom fretted over the table centerpieces. My dad complained that the open bar might not have top-shelf whiskey. Adam's father questioned if the country club was classy enough. Adam himself was noticeably detached. He'd go out late at night, claiming he needed air or space, and sometimes he wouldn't return until after dawn. I was so busy dealing with last-minute fiascos, like the florist mixing up our order, that I didn't fully register how bizarre his absences were. On the wedding morning, I woke up in a suite at the country club, where my bridesmaids had stayed with me overnight. My stomach was in knots, but I assumed it was just nerves. My girls were all excited, trying to calm me with jokes and champagne. I managed a few shaky laughs, though something felt off. Adam wasn't answering my texts. It was probably just because he was getting ready too, I told myself. As the hairstylist pinned my veil, I took a deep breath, repeating in my head that everything would be all right the moment I saw him at the altar. Then I heard a commotion in the hallway. My maid of honor, Becky, rushed into the room looking pale. "Adam's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And he's not okay." My heart almost stopped. I got up, nearly tripping over the edge of my gown, and stepped into the hallway. He stood there in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, but the tie was loosened and his eyes were bloodshot. I smelled alcohol on his breath. My dad was trying to hold him back from entering our suite. Adam, calm down. You can't see her before the ceremony, Dad said, sounding both concerned and angry. Adam just glared at me. It wasn't the look of someone who was excited to marry the love of his life. It was resentful. I carefully approached him. Adam, what's going on? I asked in a voice I hardly recognized. He stared at me for a long moment, eyes flicking from my hair to my makeup to the white dress I was wearing. Then he sneered. What's going on? I can't do this. I've been trying to tell you in 100 different ways, but you just wouldn't listen. The corridor went deathly quiet. Becky stood behind me, tears forming in her eyes. My father's jaw clenched. I took a shaky breath. Tell me what? I whispered. He shook his head. That this is all a damn lie. I'm not cut out for your fantasy wedding, your fantasy life. I'm not the guy you think I am. I've been pretending. His voice cracked at one point, but the anger overshadowed any hint of regret. My mind was spinning. We can talk. We can fix whatever's bothering you, I pleaded. I thought of all the effort we'd put in, all the love we'd shared, the memories of him waking me up with a kiss, telling me how lucky he felt. Was that all fake? He laughed bitterly, a sound that made my chest tighten. You want the truth? Fine. The truth is, you were never good enough for me. I settled because I was scared of ending up alone, and I knew you'd stick around. He paused, taking in the shock on everyone's faces. I realized a while ago that you're too clingy, too predictable, too boring, and now I just don't give a damn any. I almost forgot to breathe. I heard a strangled gasp from Becky, and my father stepped forward, fists clenched. But I raised a hand, stopping it. What are you saying? I managed to croak out. Adam's eyes had a sort of wildness I'd never seen before. I'm saying I'm done. This wedding's off. We're over. He turned to go, but then paused. And if you're smart, you won't come after me. That's when he shoved past my father and stormed off, leaving me standing there with tears streaming down my cheeks, my bouquet tumbling from my numb hands. My mother appeared, wearing a panicked expression, taking in the scene as Adam disappeared around the corner. Somewhere behind me, I heard the clatter of chairs and a bunch of startled voices. It felt like an atomic bomb had gone off, and I was the only survivor left conscious in the fallout. Time slowed. I could see my bridesmaids trying to comfort me, my parents shouting at each other, at no one in particular, just shouting because the day they'd all anticipated had imploded in the space of a minute. I sank to my knees, ignoring the fact that my dress was crumpling beneath. The pain was physical, a piercing ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I don't remember how long I stayed there. Someone eventually guided me back into the suite, sat me on a chair, and gave me water. My mother wanted to chase after Adam, scream at him, drag him back by the collar. My dad wanted to call the police. Yes, that's how furious he was. He muttered something about pressing charges, but for what? I'm not sure. The guests who'd already arrived were left in confusion. Some actually thought we'd gotten married in a private ceremony and were just late to the reception. Others whispered about the meltdown they had glimpsed. Meanwhile, I was in shock. In the hours that followed, everything turned into a sick parody of a wedding day. We had a grand venue paid for, a buffet ready to serve 150 people, a DJ, flowers, drinks, the works. But the bride sat in a locked suite, the groom was gone, and everyone else just milled around in a haze of awkwardness, gossip, and pity. Some of my relatives tried to rally around me, telling me I could still salvage the day as a party, that I shouldn't waste the food and money. But how can you celebrate anything when the person you love more than anything has just told you you're not good enough? Eventually, I asked everyone to go home. I couldn't bear the thought of standing in that hall, forced to make small talk while my heart was in pieces. Most guests were sympathetic. Some cried as they hugged me. Others mumbled condolences and said they couldn't believe Adam would do such a thing. A few from Adam's side gave me strange looks, as if suspecting I had done something to provoke his out. I couldn't even blame them. I didn't know what to believe myself. The man I knew was gentle, caring, funny. The man who broke me in that corridor was a cold, venomous stranger. I ended up back at our apartment that night, still wearing my wedding dress because I didn't have the energy or presence of mind to change. My bridesmaids came with me, helped me out of the gown that was now stained with tears and something sticky from the floors of the country club. I sat on the sofa in a pair of leggings and a t-shirt, staring blankly at the wall. Becky made me tea, Hannah brought me tissues, and my other bridesmaids tried to tidy up the space. No one knew what to say or do. I felt like a ghost, floating around without a sense of self. Over the next few days, shock gave way to anger, which then gave way to despair. I kept replaying Adam's words in my head. You were never good enough. The sentiment grated on my soul. I wondered if he'd ever truly loved me at all. Or if he had, when did that love die? My phone blew up with messages and calls. Friends, family, colleagues, even some of Adam's relatives. Most expressed sympathy or confusion. His sister, Jenna, sent me a heartfelt text apologizing for his behavior. saying she'd had no idea he was in such a bad headspace. I never responded. I couldn't find the words. Adam, for his part, went radio silent. No calls, no texts, no emails. He vanished as if he'd never existed in my life. Half of me wanted to hunt him down, demand a rational explanation. The other half was too broken to even consider confronting him. My parents were furious on my behalf, and they cycled between wanting to sue him for breach of contract, they'd spent thousands on the wedding, and wanting to drag him into a back alley somewhere for a talk. But none of that would change the fact that he'd humiliated me and shattered my heart in front of everyone I cared about. Eventually, I found out bits and pieces through mutual friends. Apparently, Adam had been having doubts for months and confided in a few people that he was trapped. One acquaintance claimed he'd overheard Adam saying he was only marrying me because it was easier than breaking up. Another friend reported that Adam had been partying frequently, showing up drunk to photography gigs, and ranting about how marriage is a scam. If it was a meltdown, it had been building for a while. But the vile part was how he pinned the blame on me at the last possible second, public, in the cruelest way. At first, I wanted to hide from them. I couldn't step outside without imagining people whispering behind my back, wondering what I did to push Adam away. My entire identity felt tainted. It didn't help that social media was abuzz with gossip. Did you hear about Rachel's wedding? The groom literally walked out. Some tried to frame it like a salacious drama, which only deepened the humiliation. I took a leave of absence from work for 2 weeks, citing a family emergency. I stayed in bed for days on end, ignoring messages except for a few close friends. I couldn't eat. Everything tasted like cardboard. I couldn't sleep. My dreams turned into nightmares of Adam's sneering face. It felt like my mind was on a loop, replaying that horrific moment in the corridor. Word by word, heartbreak by heartbreak. My friends, bless them, rallied around. Becky moved in temporarily, refusing to let me sulk in isolation. She'd coax me out of bed, drag me to the kitchen, force me to sip soup or eat at least half a sandwich. Hannah sent me daily texts reminding me that I was loved. My parents called constantly, urging me to come stay with them in Maine for a bit, but I couldn't bear the thought of traveling. My apartment was half empty now. Adam had collected some of his things when I was out, leaving random gaps on shelves and a note that read, "I'll come back for the rest later." No apology, no explanation. I remember the day Becky convinced me to see a counselor. She said, "Rach, this is a trauma. You need help processing," and she was right. I was drowning in self-doubt, blaming myself for not seeing the red flags, for not being enough to keep Adam's love. It took everything in me to gather the courage to talk to a stranger about my pain, but I did it. Her name was Dr. Green, and she had a calm, understanding presence. The first session, I broke down sobbing the moment I started describing that corridor scene. She handed me tissues and assured me that heartbreak of this magnitude can feel like physical pain, because our emotional center is so intricately tied to our bodies. Over time, therapy helped me realize that what Adam did was more about him than me. That it wasn't my lack that caused him to lash out, but his own fears, insecurities, and possibly deeper issues he'd never confronted. Realizing that intellectually was one thing, but believing it in my heart took longer. Every so often, I'd still hear his voice in my head, spitting out those horrible words. It's amazing how a single sentence can worm its way into your psyche like a cancer. About a month later, I got a call from Jenna, his sister. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. She was in tears, apologizing over and over, explaining that Adam had cut off most of the family, that he was apparently holed up in some new apartment, drinking a lot, refusing to see anyone. "I wish I'd known he was this unstable," she said. "He's always hidden stuff from us. Please don't think what he said was true." I appreciated her concern, but it didn't magically undo the damage. Still, it provided a small sense of closure, confirming that his meltdown wasn't about me being worthless. It was about his unraveling mental state. In the weeks that followed, I slowly clawed my way back to some semblance of normalcy. I returned to work. Though I dreaded the pitying looks from coworkers who knew the wedding fiasco, I pretended everything was fine, focusing on marketing campaigns and brand strategies to numb my thoughts. Sometimes I'd slip into the bathroom to cry, especially when I saw a happy couple in the office or heard talk of weddings. My parents visited me frequently, helping me navigate the financial fallout. We had contracts with vendors, deposits that weren't fully refundable. The money lost was significant, but my parents insisted it was just money, that what mattered was my emotional well-being. Some days I believed them. Other days the guilt was overwhelming. One afternoon, I mustered the courage to go through the box of wedding items. The invitations with our names, the seating chart, the little placeholders I'd so diligently crafted with calligraphy. I ended up sobbing so hard I got a splitting headache. But it also felt necessary, like I was confronting the broken pieces of a dream that needed to be laid to rest. I tossed a lot of it out, But I kept one invitation for reasons I still can't fully articulate. Maybe to remind myself of how hopeful I once was, or to remind myself of how strong I had to become when that hope was shattered. About 3 months post-breakup, I started to see glimpses of a future that wasn't entirely bleak. I had learned a lot about my own resilience. My therapist encouraged me to explore activities I loved before Adam was in my life. I rediscovered my passion for playing piano, something I'd neglected. The first time I sat down at my keyboard again, my fingers felt stiff, but the notes began to flow and soon I was crying, feeling both grief and relief as the music let me release pent-up emotions. Socially, I tiptoed back into gatherings. I'd meet friends for coffee or dinner, but I avoided big crowds. I was terrified of running into Adam or anyone who might mention him. He disappeared from social media, which was a blessing. I'd blocked him on every platform anyway because I couldn't handle the possibility of seeing him happy or moving on. Then one day, out of nowhere, he called me. I stared at my phone, heart racing, unsure if I should answer. Against my better judgment, I pressed accept. There was silence for a few seconds, then a shaky breath on the other end. "Rachel? It's Adam," he said, as if I wouldn't recognize his voice. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Anger, sadness, curiosity, a twisted longing for closure. He mumbled a sorry. A single word. "Sorry." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. He said he'd been going through stuff, that he'd panicked about marriage, that he knew he hurt me terribly. At one point, his voice broke. "I wish I could take back those words," he said. "I never meant them." I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Then why did you say them?" He didn't have an answer that made sense. He went on about how he felt suffocated, how he was terrified we'd end up miserable like his parents, how a part of him wanted to sabotage the wedding before it happened. "I thought if I could make you hate me, it'd be easier," he added in a trembling voice. It was almost pathetic hearing him unravel. But part of me also felt a twisted sense of relief. At least he was admitting it was his fear, not my supposed inadequacy. He then asked if we could meet. My heart wavered. Every rational part of my brain screamed no, but some wounded part of my heart yearned for a final confrontation. Some kind of tangible closure. I agreed, but on neutral ground. A quiet cafe in the middle of the city. When the day came, I arrived early, hands trembling around the mug of chamomile tea. Adam showed up looking disheveled, pale, with stubble that suggested he'd stopped caring about appearances. He sat across from me, eyes downcast. For a while, neither of us said anything. The cafe was softly lit, with the hum of coffee machines and muted chatter from other patrons. Finally, he spoke. "You look good," he said, a sad smile curving his lips. "Better than me," I shrugged, not wanting to engage in small talk. I was there to hear his explanation, or apology, or whatever this was. He rubbed his palms together nervously and confessed he'd been drinking too much, that he was seeing a therapist because he realized how many issues he'd been burying. He touched on his childhood, how his parents' divorce was brutal, and how he developed this core belief that intimacy equals pain. Meeting me changed that briefly, but the idea of making a lifelong commitment triggered a self-destruct button in his mind. "I didn't know how to handle my fear, so I lashed out," he said, voice quavering. "That's not an excuse, just the truth." I let him talk. When he finished, he asked if there was any chance for us, if we could start over. I felt my throat tighten. Part of me wanted to see him as the man I once loved, but the memory of that corridor, the vile words, the heartbreak, was too strong. "You broke something in me," I said quietly. "You humiliated me. You shattered my trust in you, and in people in general. I don't know if I can ever see you the same way." Tears pricked my eyes. I blinked them back, determined not to cry in front of him. He nodded, looking as though he expected that answer. We sat in a heavy silence. Then, I stood up, said goodbye, and walked out. I felt a sense of finality, like I'd closed a chapter. Yes, my heart was still bruised, but I sensed I was going to be okay without him. That might sound trivial, but it was a monumental revelation for someone who'd spent months believing she was worthless. Life after that meeting wasn't magically perfect, but it was a turning point. I poured my energy into healing and rediscovering myself. I traveled to New Orleans with Becky and Hannah, exploring jazz clubs and sampling amazing food. I reconnected with old college friends, started running in the mornings, and even played in a small local piano recital. Each step was me reclaiming a piece of my life that I'd once entwined with Adam.